everyone, welcome back to the Libertas International podcast. Once again, thank you for sharing this time with us. I'm super excited about this interview today, but I do want to give two disclaimers on this interview. One, it's my good friend Batman. He's been working this crime for a long time, and he's working some active cases, and he asked me not to reveal his name, and so we're just going to call him Batman. And the two disclaimers is one, he joins via his wife's cell phone on our Zoom call, and so the audio is not the best audio that you will hear. It kind of goes in and out. You really have to pay close attention on some parts to what he says, because it goes from good quality to average quality. And the conversation was so good that I didn't want to redo the interview. And so just disclaimer that the audio is not the best audio that you will hear on the podcast. And he also lives in like the boonies out in the south of the United States, so I don't think he gets good cell service anyway. The second is I just want to put in a massive trigger warning on this podcast. This is not a podcast for kids. I would even go as far to say this is not a podcast for anybody under the age of 18. You know, this podcast, we talk about a lot of hard things. We talk about a lot of hard cases. We talk about a lot of graphic things that happen to a lot of good people, innocent kids. And this podcast interview with Batman gets extremely raw. He deals with some extremely vile, evil, violent, sick, depraved people. And he goes into details on what makes them that way. And this is not a podcast for kids. So if you're listening to this in the car or you have kids in the car, I would recommend that you shut it off and you throw in your headphones and you go for a walk, or you listen to it on your commute when you have no kids in the car. Or if you're in the age of 18, that you just wait until you're 18 to listen to this, because it is extremely graphic. It's stomach churning. It's disgusting. It's reality. It's the reality of what's going on in many of these situations, but it is definitely, this podcast is not for kids. And so just once again, throwing it out there, there is a massive trigger warning on this. Batman goes into some very graphic details on what occurred in these operations that he worked on. So please, listener discretion, be advised, not for kids, not under the age of 18. But the conversation is raw, it's real, it's inspiring, and I am very lucky to know this man and to be a witness of the good work that he's doing across Latin America and also the United States. And so please interview my interview with Batman. And we're recording. Batman, welcome to the pod, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Tyler. It's a blessing to be here.
What are you doing right now? Are you smoking a cigar? Are you drinking some coffee? What are you?
Yeah,
right now?
I'm sitting out on the front porch looking at God's miracle of trees and sun. Got my dogs out here smoking a cigar and got some coffee.
And how many dogs do you have?
Excited to talk to you.
How many dogs do you have now?
We're down to two. I've got a pit bull that we rescued. He's about a year and a half, and then we still have Nala, who's one of the golden that we got in Guatemala.
And how long has it been since Gorda passed?
Gorda?
I think I lost you. You still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Gorda passed about 9 months ago, and fortunately she had a heart attack. So it was a quick, painless exit of this world.
Good. I love me that Gorda, man.
Gorda was awesome.
That was
the pit bull. The pit bull's pretty good, bro. I've never had a pit bull before, and I was much on the side of anti-pit bull because of the things that are out there. But we call him Güero, and he is just a phenomenal dog. Mm-hmm. Loves the kids, and so he's just been a blessing to our family.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Well, I'm glad to hear it, man. And I'm super glad you come on the show and share a little about your story. Obviously, we've known each other for going on 7 years, and just someone I'm always. Yeah, it's been that long, right? It's been 2017, 2016.
Yeah, I have no idea on dates. I don't even know what the date is today, but it's been a long time. And yeah, we've been all over Latin America together. And it was always awesome having you and Jessica use our home as your base when you were traveling in countries that we were in at the time. So yeah, man, we've had a great time rescuing and restoring these children. It's been awesome.
It has been. And That's why I'm just so grateful for the stuff that you do because the more I think about just like my time in the movement and the anti-trafficking field, the more grateful it makes me for people. I'd call them pioneers. I don't know if you would use that same. You probably wouldn't. You definitely wouldn't use the same term, but I'm going to use it. It's pioneers, people that have paved the way to for the new generation of people that are fighting exploitation, fighting sex trafficking, and you've been fighting human trafficking in a lot of these countries before there was even probably the laws in place or the terms in place to call it human trafficking. I would assume that's with 18 years, 19 years now doing operations in Latin America. I imagine that's the case, right? Where you were doing stuff before there was even the law in place to protect you or to prosecute the traffickers.
Yeah, absolutely. I started in 2005, and back then there were no, well, it was IJM, but other than IJM, there were no organizations, which, as you know, today there's thousands of organizations fighting this evil. Back then, you're right, there were no laws on the books. It was pretty much my first 2 years were only in Mexico, and Mexico had no laws against sexual exploitation or human trafficking. I was fortunate to work with the DOJ attorney out of the Mexico City office, Adriana Viejo, and she actually wrote the human trafficking laws for Mexico. Mexico passed them, and the day they passed them, I was in Veracruz live on an op, and she called me and said, "Okay, we have the law. Are you ready to go?" And they sent HSI sent a TAC team in, or actually an intel team in, and they brought in, as you know, the Mexican army, which that was overkill. So not only was I part of helping draft the human trafficking laws for Mexico, I also led the first operation under the new law. And then later in Baja California didn't have laws either, even though Mexico City passed a national law. Baja California still couldn't. They didn't have any way to prosecute these cases. So in Baja California, I ended up at our safe house housing the first 5 victims that were rescued post the human trafficking law passing in Baja. So yeah, it's been an interesting run. I thank God that today, people that are jumping into this space that feel called to get in have a lot of organizations. There's a ton of material online to get training, and so things have definitely taken a huge step forward.
I guess my first question on that, Batman, is in your time with the movement, where have you seen the movement has improved? Like in your space working against human trafficking, where has, I guess, people, populations, nonprofits, where have they stepped up and are doing a better job than what they were doing beforehand? And
Mm-hmm.
where do they have areas to improve still, based on what you're seeing in the movement right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the huge victory, the huge step forward is that almost every country now does have human trafficking laws, which without them you can't prosecute these cases. So that's probably the greatest thing that's happened over the last 18 years that I've been doing this. And then secondly, on a positive side, a lot of these countries, due to the work that you and I and many others have done, are much more aware of the problem, and they are going on the offensive to fight it, which is something that would have been unheard of even 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. So those are huge. I mean, the fact that there's human trafficking task force in at least, I mean, you and I are Latin America, so I'll focus on that. But there are human trafficking task force in almost every country in Latin America, and that's huge. So I consider that the greatest victory. Also on the aftercare side, people didn't really understand how to. I call them victims. For me, they're victims until they've found Christ, and then they become just a system, rather than the survivor term. But before, people didn't really know. There was very few people that were trained and understood what these children or women or men had gone through. So getting them the help they needed was really difficult. So that's another huge thing. I mean, there's organizations now, there are people specialists that are doing amazing work, including you, including your organization, to be able to meet the needs of these people, of these victims that have gone through so much. On a negative side, I don't know that it's I don't know that it's an organization, an NGO failure, or a government failure. But one thing, obviously, is the lack of co-op. I think it's really sad that organizations are so reluctant to work together. I think the fight could be, our fight would be much stronger if we would all unite and work together. But that's just the way these things go. The other issue, as you know, is the volume. It's not getting better. The with the internet and with child pornography being so available, you can literally, if you go onto any normal porn site and just keep clicking, you're probably within 5 or 6 clicks going to end up with child pornography on your screen. And unfortunately, guys who see that stuff, the percentages of converting, looking at that stuff into acting it out, I don't know the number, but it's really high. So the demand side is growing. People are getting sicker and sicker. Before you started recording, we were talking about what you saw in Arizona with people having sex with dead snakes and dolphins. I mean, what kind of world what kind of world is that? But and with all these migrant children that are being brought to America right now, we're working a case out of El Paso where you can literally go down there and for between $100 and $1,000 take a child from the cartels in the U.S. Then they basically put you on a payment program where you pay monthly like you would a car, but you own that child. And to make those payments, not all, but many people are, either using them for domestic labor or, for sexual labor. So, I just feel like we're we're not really winning the battle.
Yeah, that's what I get that question a lot of, like, what can we do? Like, so some organizations, that's like their mantra of like, we're here to end human trafficking. And I applaud, the effort and the I don't want to go, too negative here, but I don't think it's a reality. I don't think it's a reality too that we're ever going to end this, because it's such a deeply rooted human problem, and nothing short of a meteor to the earth is going to end this. But like, you can make distinct impacts for certain people, certain individuals, certain survivors, certain victims, get some of these bad guys in jail, and make, I go back to the starfish story quite a bit. That's a very well known story, like in our field, of you maybe can't rescue all of them, but you can rescue the one. And with more collaboration and with more support, like you're saying, we could have a much larger impact than what's already being had. And I totally agree with what you're saying. The amount of infighting between nonprofits, government, like it's really sad. And I feel like it really definitely hinders the work that we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. I hate to say that. The heart behind ending human trafficking, sexual exploitation is awesome, but I agree with you. I don't think it's a reality. And I also agree with you. I mean, the way I look at this, the only way that I have stayed sane for 18 years is, you take one at a time and you help one at a time. And sometimes, we get lucky and we're able to help 20 at a time.
Yeah.
But you focus on those that are available to you to give help to, and you get them all the help that you can. We're not God, so I can't. If I could speak a word in human trafficking would be over, I'd speak that word, but I can't.
And I think you said something to me. I don't know if you remember you saying this to me, but it was the experience we had at one of the princess parties where I'm sure you remember, because it's seared into my brain probably just as much as it is into yours. We were at the princess party, and those pictures started to make the round among the girls, of the girls that were getting ready to come into the program that had been murdered by those gang members, because they knew they were going to leave the next week to
Yeah,
join the princess program and leave this world of exploitation behind. And I remember you and I talked, and on my end, I felt so guilty, because, like, well, if we had just got Batman, more funding, or if we had just had more room for five more girls in this thing, or if we didn't take a rest week, we could have prevented this from happening. And you said something to me that has really stuck with me. I always try to bring up, in my moments of vulnerability and humanity, it's that we're not God. And
Right.
and just saying that like out loud, like it's some of those like frustrations that you have with being a human, having those limitations. It kind of brings me back down where it's like this situation, this what happened is totally out of our control, and we couldn't have stopped it even if we tried because we're not God. And knowing your own personal limitations can be, on one end, on the small end, frustrating because you're not God and you'd like to be God, or you'd like to, just like you said, speak and it would be over. But at the same time, it's also super freeing to where you can rid yourself of that guilt because you're not God, to know that the blame of what happened with these murders was those people that committed the murder and them alone. It wasn't on us. It wasn't on anybody else. It was just the fallen world that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was, I think that was in Guatemala. And, we spent like 5 years there. And I had numerous encounters with the Maras and the MS-13 and MS-18. And they murdered multiple girls who were getting ready to exit the street and get into the Princess program. It comes down to the same thing that's always seems to be the problem is greed. And, those girls were generating anywhere from $500 to $2,000 a month for those guys. And so, you start adding up those numbers. We were taking out 15 to 20 girls off the street at a time. And so you multiply that, even on the low end, you're talking about a lot of money, especially in a country like Guatemala. But yeah, I mean, I literally, I would not, well, you know me, so I'm not really sane, but I wouldn't even be near as sane as I am right now if I didn't accept that I'm not God. And, you just gotta, you do what you can do. There's some of these cases, we've worked a lot of cases together. There's some of these girls that you do everything you can and it still doesn't work. And it's like, if you let that eat away at you, if you let that take you out of the game because you feel like, it's not working, you'd be destroyed. But you got to focus on the ones that you win. For us, in the years that I've been in this, I still get messages from girls that, we rescued, I don't know, 15 years ago. And at the time, they weren't ready to get well, to get recovered and start a new life. And, 15 years later, all of a sudden, they have turned their lives around and are in Christ and, productive and have kids. And so you never know. We can plant seeds, but we can't make them grow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, yeah, we see that too, where, one of my favorite survivors, I shouldn't have favorites, but, they, the one from Guatemala, actually, it was
we all have favorites.
one of them that you were there in Guatemala when the op happened. When she was just 13, she wasn't ready to receive any help, and then she ended up reaching out a couple years later and wanted help and had finished high school and got the date of her rescue engraved in her graduation ring. And now she's studying social work. She wants to work for a nonprofit that serves survivors of trafficking. She's doing everything right. But when she was 13, imagine like a 13-year-old might not be ready to receive any help, but she was
Sure.
15, 16, then she was ready. And I think that's
Yep.
something that I've learned a lot too, just in the process of working with survivors, is that you have to work with them kind of where they are and not where you'd like them to be, because they're just kids, bro. Like they're just
Yep.
kids. Like decisions that I was making at 13 years old, I was buying a Bigfoot outfit on eBay and scaring tourists in Yellowstone.
Right.
You don't make great
Yeah.
decisions.
I mean, yeah, Ty, especially if you consider where the world is today. I'm much older than you, so my childhood and my adolescent years, they were crazy, but the world was different. We could leave our door unlocked, and we could be out on the streets till, basically my mom's rule was when the sun goes down, come home.
Yeah.
We used to walk to from town to town, and never having to worry about the stuff that children these days have to worry about. So I think a lot of what we're seeing, especially in adolescence these days, is the stress that their world brings on them. I mean, it's a tough time to be an adolescent, and especially for girls, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, sometimes you gotta let a big fish run until it tires out and it's ready to come in. And I think that not in all cases. Some of these girls that we've worked with and you've worked with, I mean, they're ready. One of the things I do when we're doing outreach in the red light zones, one of the questions I ask them is, "Hey, do you hate your life?" And some people are offended by that, but that's something that Jesus said. And their response to that question usually usually tells me a lot. Like if they say yes, you've got somebody that is open, ready, and willing and wants change. If they say no, I'll still love on them. I'll still offer them the same things that I would offer the girl that said she does hate her life. But usually you can tell right away that they're not ready.
Yeah.
So, we're not God.
No, it's a good thing to remember too. But despite us not being God, you can actually do some really good work, and that's what I'm excited to talk to you about. We're our first Zoom session is running on 3 minutes, and so I'll give a quick introduction to the next part of our conversation. We'll
Okay.
take a little pee break or coffee break or whatever kind of break you need to take. And I'd love to talk about, we people who have listened to this podcast for a while know that, our main mission is to support survivors of human trafficking and then go after mainly the American bad guys that are hurting these girls. And so your work, just as we were talking and reminiscing, you have 4 cases that I'd love to just pick your brain about and talk about with the cases that you've worked in Colombia, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Peru on how you have kind of planted the seeds of going after these American pedophiles, American traffickers that has enabled, organizations like mine to support survivors of this crime and to go after these American bad guys. And so I'd love to open up that conversation when we get back and talk about the case of Wayne Cooperman, Billy from Costa Rica, the Beast, David Joshua Brown, and Dennis DeJesus. All right, Batman. Well, when we left off, we talked about those 4 American cases that I'd love to talk about, and I just want to give the floor to you to talk about them and just make our way through the region. So, what do you say we start out with Wayne Cooperman from Nicaragua?
Okay. Yeah. Tyler, I mean, it's tough to talk about these cases. One of the things that always has bothered me and continues to bother me is that Americans are probably the biggest predator group in the world. These Americans travel abroad, and some of these guys actually live abroad specifically to have sex with children. So it's an embarrassment, I think, to all normal Americans. But yeah, it is what it is. So Wayne Cooperman, we had that was in Nicaragua. We had a safe house set up there, and we had a family come in, and there was the mother who was a prostitute in red light zone, and 4 of her 8 children she brought with her. The oldest was we'll call her I. She was 12, and there was a 10-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. Actually, there was 5, so there was also another girl that was 8. And after about a month in our program and going through the therapy that they were getting, the oldest girl, who was 12, shared with my wife that she had been sexually abused and raped by an American. And so, my wife asked permission, first of all, to be able to share that information with me, because I don't engage in the histories or the testimonies of these girls typically, because most of it is sexual. It's just not appropriate for me personally, for what I do, to be hearing that. But in that case, my wife was given permission to share with me what had happened. So I did a forensic interview with the victim, and basically it was horrific. This guy had the we'll call her Miss I, had her aunt working for him, supposedly as a house cleaner, but really what she was his recruiter. And she, on a regular basis, would bring him children, and he liked them 7 to 10 years old was his typical prototype, and she had run out of available victims, and so he put a lot of pressure on her. So she called up uh, her aunt and asked if the two oldest girls, who they were 11 and 9, I think at the time, could come over and spend the day with her. Well, she brought them to this guy's house, and he checked them both out, and they gave him some pizza or whatever, to make him feel comfortable, and he was attracted to the older one, who was 11 at the time. So they left. She arranged that that girl could come and spend the night with her, supposedly at her house. And in reality, she took her to the guy's house, Wayne Cooperman's house. His MO was he would give them candy. The candy had some kind, I don't know exactly what drug was in it. Basically, it was like a root, so that the girls would pass out. Once they were passed out, he and the woman, who was in this case, it was the aunt of the victim, they would then rape the girls. And he videotaped these things, and his big thing was he liked to have anal sex with these children while they were passed out. So she basically was knocked out for 6 or 7 hours, and then woke up in the morning and had extreme pain in her anus. And she was taken back to at the time they were actually living in a quote Christian ministry, which I'm still shocked that they allowed this to happen. But she went back and she told them, "Hey, I've got a lot of pain," and they ignored that pain. They said that it was just normal. She probably had indigestion or something. So she gave me a brief description of the guy. She didn't know his name. She couldn't remember where he lived. So I got enough information out of her to contact HSI, and HSI was able to look at travel logs and basic. We knew his name was Wayne. We didn't know his last name, and they were able to identify who they believed he was. They sent us pictures, his passport picture, and I showed it to her, and she said, "Yeah, that's the guy." So at that point, Nicaragua legal system there still still a mess, and it was definitely a mess back then. They actually had a human trafficking department, although they weren't doing much. Victoriano Ruiz was the head of that. He actually won. He was one of the heroes of the tip report, which I know you know what that is, but that's the trafficking in person report that the State Department puts out every year. So every year they pick a hero, what they call heroes from around the world, of law enforcement officers who have done exemplary work. And Victoriano was one of those. So the HSI agent that I was working with communicated with Victoriano, and I already knew Victoriano. So he came over to our house, and he and a female agent did their own interview with the victim, and they're like, "Okay, we got to do this." They didn't have enough information about the guy for the Nicaraguan court to open the case. So they asked me, they said, "Hey, we hate to ask and we hate to do this, but do you have somebody that we can send in as a potential victim for this guy, that we can grab audio, that we grab video, proving that he is, interested in kids?" So at the time, we had a girl living in the home. She was about 6 months into her recovery, and she was stable, actually more than stable. And she was actually 19. She looked like she was maybe 15. So my wife and I sat down with her, and we asked her, we said, this is the situation. This guy is hurting kids on a regular basis. Like, this is a weekly thing for him. And the only way we're going to be able to stop him is if we can get somebody to go in and get video, get surveillance on this guy, so that the Nicaraguan judge will sign an arrest warrant. So right away, she said yes. And I said, "Hold on, slow down. I want you to pray about this overnight, and let's have another conversation in the morning." So in the morning, she came in my office and she said, I'm in. Like, we got to stop this guy." So we arranged for her to have an encounter with the recruiter. We knew where she hung out during the day, so we just sent her in. She made the connect. She actually awesome undercover operator. She became. She made the connect and got invited to come meet this guy. We wired her up. She went in. She met him. Same thing. He in this case he didn't have to drug her. He thought she was willing. We told her if he wants to do something right away, you're on your period, so you can't. So she used that, got all the video and audio we needed, and got out of the house. With that information, we got that to the Human Trafficking Task Force, and they were able to get an arrest warrant. HSI connected, and it was actually a battle over who was going to get to prosecute this guy. The day of the arrest, which I've been on a lot of those, which those were always awesome days. And when you get to see justice happen, I know you, Tyler, have been on a lot of those as well. But we were sitting outside. We had about 25 agents. He lived in a cul-de-sac around the block, and he always left for work at 9 o'clock in the morning. Well, 9 o'clock passed, 9:30 passed, 10 o'clock passed, and they're like, he must know something. He's not leaving, and they didn't know what to do. Well, there was a general from the Nicaraguan army there, military there, and he came to me and he said, "Hey, can you go knock on his door and make sure he's even there?" Like, okay, yeah, I can do that. The guy doesn't know me. So I'm walking down the street to go knock on his door, and he pulls out. And as he pulls up, he looks at me, and he didn't know who I was. He couldn't have known what I was there for, but he knew something was up. Well, he only had about another 50 feet to go, and he got, they came in with like 10 cars and surrounded him and arrested him. He was convicted in court. They gave him 25 years, and we were all very happy about that. They found I don't know, 200 or 300 child rape videos on his devices of girls, and you could see, like, in the videos. Unfortunately, I had to see some of them. The candy that he gave them, literally, they were knocked out cold. So these girls were like, it's like a corpse. And this guy just doing the sickest possible things you can think of. Unfortunately, Nicaragua is a country with very low resources, and he was in jail for about 5 years, and he ended up buying himself out, which that hurt. I was promised by the American government that if he ever did get out, that they would prosecute him. So when he did get out, I went back to them. I'm like, hey, you promised me that if he did get out, which we kind of expected in Nicaragua, with money, you can pretty much get out of anything. And unfortunately, the U.S. government did nothing. So, hopefully, God willing, his 5 years in jail, which Nicaraguan jail is not a place you want to be, hopefully that was enough to turn him away from ever doing it again. But we don't know.
Yeah, I just even like a Google search of his name, like you find, I guess he was interviewed when he was in prison, and it sounds like the prison that he was in, like there was like boxing matches that he had to participate in. Like it sounds like he definitely had it rough in that prison for while he was there, which I guess is some kind of justice. But I know, you with the work that I really admire about like what you guys do is, once the guy's in jail, like your work doesn't stop. I imagine that with this girl that came forward with this information, and that you guys continue to walk with her through her healing while she recovered from what had happened to her well after the arrest happened.
Yeah, I mean, I've done about 200 operations over the years, so it's really hard for me to remember dates and stuff. But that girl, I still am in communication almost daily with her on Facebook. And her recovery was kind of weird in that she got well. Like, she was healed. She was literally walking in the new life, which, as you know, I mean, it's not easy, but man, when they get there, it is awesome. And I don't know what happened. She wasn't with us anymore, but she would still come to the ministry base to visit. We were in daily communication with her. Something happened, and she kind of stumbled and fell back down. And it took about 2 years to get her back up. But she's, I think it's been 10 years now. She's doing well. She's got 3 kids now. She's gone through a couple of rough patches. We had to send in a lawyer. I had to hire a lawyer the guy that the father of the children and her husband. There were some issues there, and we had to deal with him. Luckily, well, not luckily, I don't know how to say it. In Nicaragua, things are different. So, in one of the cases where she was going to testify against him, the attorneys were outside as well as the police, and he showed up, and she was outside, and he just started beating her. So the negative of that was obviously she got beat up, but the positive was he got pulled off. He lost custody. He got put in jail. I think he's still there. It's been 4 or 5 years that he's serving in jail time. So I would consider her a victory. I was able to be with her through the court case, and sitting front row while she was testifying, which she requested that. And we love her and we're proud of her. What she did, she sacrificed a lot to put that guy away. But if we hadn't put him away, he was on a 1 a week rape of children. So 52 weeks a year, you're talking about a lot of children that were saved because of her courage.
Well, let's make our way down the continent, man. And this is out of all the cases that we had talked about, pre-show, this is the one I think I know the least about, because there's so many that, even getting to know you for 7 years or just not enough time in a day to talk about all these cases and all these stories. And so I don't know a lot about the case of Billy from Costa Rica. And so the floor is yours, man. Tell us about the case that you worked against a guy named Billy.
Okay, Billy's going to be a short conversation because our part was pretty minimal. I have a lot of contacts throughout Latin America. I have people that give me information that are on the ground in a lot of countries. And we take in all I call it information. We'll take in any information, any and all information, and then you have to work to either decide if it's actually intel. Intel is something that's actionable. Information is not. So in Jaco, Costa Rica, it's a weird town. It's like this cool beach town during the day, but when the lights go out, when the sun goes down, it's Sodom and Gomorrah. So we had a bunch of people through a church contact that lived there. I had flown in multiple times just to see how things roll there. As you know, Tyler, every country is different. The sex tourists that go to Costa Rica are completely different from the sex tourists that go to Medellin. It's a totally different scene.
Yeah.
A lot of times, even in the country, the San Jose sex tourism is very different from Jaco. But in this case, they give me information on this guy, Billy, who was a drug addict, I think cocaine and crack. And he was basically running sex tours where he would take people from Costa Rica, from Jaco, into Nicaragua, in the jungle part of Nicaragua, to have sex, with children. They had these brothels set up, and they would bus them in, and they'd get out of the bus, and they'd spend 2 days there and have sex with as many kids as they could, and bus back. Well, Billy also was a pedophile, so he was feasting on a lot of adolescents. His thing was more the 13 to 16-year-old. That was his kink. And so we were getting intel from these people on these girls, because they were able to meet with, it's a small town, so everybody knows everybody. And they were starting to talk to these girls through their outreach ministry that had been with Billy. So in that case, at that time, Costa Rica was a total no-go zone. Costa Rica authorities would not help with anything at the time. And unfortunately, the attaché from HSI that was over Costa Rica, he was out of Panama, but he had Panama, Costa Rica, and I think 2 other countries, but he wasn't living in Costa Rica. So through an agent in the U.S. at HSI, I was able to get the information to him. He went to then U.S. Attorney Alessandra Serrano and presented the case. And I was flown in. I flew in and met her, talked about the case and what we had. And she basically gave us a list of, I need this, 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 and this. So a lot of those, the thises were stuff that would have been really hard for us to get. But we found this guy who had been he was a street guy, a ex-drug user, but he knew the street. So I contacted him. I sent him a little bit of moving money, of street money, and he was able to get close enough to Billy where Billy invited him to his place, and he was there when these 13, 14, 15-year-old girls were coming in. He didn't witness any sexual activity, but he witnessed enough that and was able to report it to be able to get HSI to say yes, it's the case. HSI, I don't know how. I don't deal with the political side. Battle that I fight is it's just not the political stuff. It's not my thing. But whatever happened, they were able to get Costa Rica to sign off on a warrant. So the HSI agent from the U.S. flew in, met with Costa Rica authorities. They had a whole setup there in Jaco, and all they needed was for Billy to leave his apartment. But the guy was whacked out on drugs. It was like, back then, especially HSI didn't have much of a budget, or they didn't have much of a budget for this kind of stuff. So the agents that were there, including the attaché, were like, okay, we can only save one more day. We got to get this guy out of his apartment. The Costa Rica law would not allow them to take down the door. So the agent kept calling him, and he was tweaking on coke, yes, and would not leave. Well, he told him something. I don't know. I wasn't there, so I don't know what the final conversation was. But they said enough to get him to walk outside of his door. And when he walked outside his door, the cops were there. I got it's one of my classic pictures that I save. I'm not a picture guy. I don't save much, but I have the picture of Billy in cuffs, and his face is just mess. He looks like Mike Tyson. Looks like an opponent of Mike Tyson after a fight. His bloody mess with black eyes and puffed up face. So, unfortunately, in that case, which you don't win them all, the prosecution failed, and all they did was deport him. Which again, it's another one of those "we're not God" things. But I am thankful that we got him out of that country. We got him out of that city where he was very connected. And last I knew, he was.
Well, that's definitely a win. I had no idea. I didn't know any of those details. I didn't know that you'd done that kind of work in Jaco. And yeah, Jaco is definitely an interesting spot for sure down there in Costa Rica. And you described it perfect. Like you go down there, it's like this beach paradise during the day, and at night it turns into something else completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the next case I want to talk about is the Dennis case, Dennis de Jesus, and this is probably my favorite. Favorite's a weird word. It's the case that's probably that's most personal to me that we've talked about on this podcast because I was lucky enough to have one of the survivors that was rescued in this operation in my care for the last 5 or 6 years. As she has gone on to graduate high school, start a business, and now is in cosmetology school. And I'll never get the terminology right, but it's someone that works on skin to make skin look younger and more hydrated. And there's a term for it that I can't remember off the top of my head, but she's currently in that program as we speak and doing a great job. But it was I'm only lucky enough to care for her and to help her along, her proyecto de vida, because you did the back work 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago against a guy named Dennis de Jesus from Florida. And so, Batman, the floor is yours, man. Tell us about the Dennis case.
Okay. Yeah. Well, tell her that I'm a client in waiting. God knows I could use the
What is, you know what the term is that I'm thinking of? What is the, this is going to
I don't rejuvenation. I've heard of it. A lot of people talking about it, rejuvenation, but I don't know what the term is that they use. Okay, so Dennis de Jesus, as you know,
esthetician. That's what it's called. Esthetician.
Esthetician. Okay.
All right.
So we had just completed a large operation in Cartagena. I think we get rescued like 100 something victims there. And the Colombians were really excited about that because it gave them a lot of press. They got some good arrests. A lot of victims were rescued, and obviously the U.S. government was extremely excited because they were running point on that operation. So when that op went down, they said, "Hey, we need to keep doing this." And the organization and the people that we were working with at the time were like, "Yeah, let's do it." So everybody got home, and I got a call, and they said, "Hey, can you do Medellin?" And I said, "I've never been there. I haven't been there yet, but yeah, I mean, we can do anywhere. I can literally drop in pretty much anywhere in the world, I think, and have an operation live within 48 hours." And so everything was looking good. And then the U.S. government, for whatever reason, jumped back in and said, "Okay, the only way we're going to approve this off is if there's a U.S. nexus," which, that's the way it was at the time. The U.S. wanted to do cases, but they had to have an American nexus, an American connection for them to support the operation. And especially in Colombia, it's really dangerous to be operational without having the U.S. government on your side and kind of overseeing for just protection. I mean, it's a dangerous place. So I got a call from HSI, and they're like, "Listen, can you find an American nexus?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, I'll see." I didn't know at that moment that Medellin is full of expats, many of them Americans that are there. And I understand why they're there. It's a beautiful, if I could live anywhere in the world, it'd be there. It's beautiful climate, beautiful scenery. It's very inexpensive. It's like a San Diego of Colombia, except it doesn't have water, just mountains. But yeah, so I started investigating. Basically, when I run pre-op, pre-op for me involves basically a total dive into everything I can find about the sexual tourism scene in a city. So in doing that, I found this Facebook group it's gone now because of me, but the Facebook group was all it was American sex tourism. There were thousands of them in this group. So I created a fake profile, and I made my way into that group. And I started talking about how much money I had and how, I was going to pay the girls. These guys were only paying the girls like $50. I'm like, "Oh, I'll pay them 100." There was a lot of girls, working girls that were in that group. So I started getting bombarded with friend requests. And it was not only the girls, the members, the Americans that were in that group started hitting me up. Next thing I knew, it was like within 48 hours, I had like 630 friends, most of them from that group. So this one guy, Dennis, he starts sending me these private messages talking about, "Oh, you're going to love it there." Because I told him, "Hey, I've never been there." It's like, "You're going to love it." He goes, "There's awesome girls." That conversation just continued. Like that conversation went on for, I think, 45 days. Little by little, Dennis started sharing more about his thing. And what he liked to do, he'd buy these costumes. And his thing was that 13 to 16 age range. He'd buy these costumes and he'd have the girls dress up in them. And he would hire 3 girls at a time. And he didn't necessarily participate, but he would pay them to have sex with each other while he watched. And, he started talking about, we started making I'm like, "We can't have this conversation, Dennis, on Facebook. It's dangerous. There's cops here." And the whole time, every day I was sending my report to HSI and to the U.S. Attorney's Office of everything, basically a printout of our conversation, which I think when prosecution came, that there were close to 500 pages. But this guy would just all day long sending me messages. So we got moved over to WhatsApp, and I told him, "Hey, this still isn't really safe. We got to use, code words," because he started talking about minors. And I'm like, "Let's call them fresh." So if you're he was trying to basically pimp me out girls. And I'm like, "If you're going to send me fresh, tell me it's fresh." So I started getting these pictures, and I'm looking at these girls, and some of them look like, they weren't, but they look like they were maybe 10 years old. I think they were probably 13, 14 years old. And he's making all these connects for me. He's having these girls add my WhatsApp, and I start getting messages from these kids. And, he started telling me the details of the crap that he liked. And you're in a situation where you're having that conversation and you want to kill the guy on the other end, but you can't. You have to act like you're in the same place as him. Like, oh wow, you're saying that a 13-year-old girl is so freaking hot, and it's sick. It's sick, but it's the only way to do it. Well, as things progressed, we got him to the point where we had the sting set up in Medellin, and actually it was Medellin and two other cities. We had it set up where three ops were going down at the same time, literally in the same hour, because the word gets spread so fast there. So the day or 2 days before, they asked me, they're like, "You got to get him to fly in for this party so we can get him at the party." And I told him, I said, "Hey man, I didn't buy your ticket. Come on out. You're gonna love this. We got a party. We've got all these girls. We've got a bunch of your freshes that are coming. I'm paying for everything." And at first he said yes, and then like the next day, I don't know what happened. Either he thought about it, or he talked to somebody, but something happened, and he said, "No, I don't want to come." So I called the U.S. attorney, and I'm like, "Listen, he's not coming. What are we going to do?" And she said, "Well, with all the stuff you've sent us, the pictures and him telling you and connecting you with children, and those children, I met with a lot of those children, which was all on a video where they were telling me, oh yeah, you're a friend of Dennis. I was with Dennis last year, or I was with Dennis 3 years ago." That was enough to prosecute him. So the U.S. attorney did a warrant. I think it was Miami-Dade. I don't remember if he was in Miami or I don't know. He was in Fort Lauderdale. So the police went to his house 2 days before the big op in Colombia and pulled him out and arrested him. They found costumes because his next trip was scheduled for, I think, 3 months from the date of arrest. He had the costumes there that he had purchased. They also found, I think, at least one image or one video of him of his sexual encounters with kids in Colombia on his phone. And he was sentenced to 15 years, which I imagine that 15 years is pretty close to coming up anytime soon. But it was an amazing case because that gave the U.S. the nexus that they needed. And it opened the door. I think the day of op in Colombia, I think we rescued, I don't know, but I think it was like 150 victims. So the weird thing about Dennis, because a lot of people ask, like, okay, what is the profile of a pedophile? And I think 18 years ago, I probably could have answered that easier. Unfortunately, today there is no profile. I mean, I've done cases where I've put a lot of pastors away for this stuff, Latin American pastors and American pastors. And there really is no profile. You've got young guys, you've got old guys, you've got tattooed guys, you got non-tattooed guys, you got loners, you got group parties where they're having sex with kids. There's no profile. But the weird thing about Dennis was he was working as like I don't know what it was, but he had a low-end job in I think it was a freight company. I think he was making like $15 an hour. So what the guy would do is literally save up every dollar that he could out of every single check to be able to go to Colombia for 1 week every year and have sex with children. That was his whole life. He lived 300 and whatever, 50 days a year, or whatever that is, 358 a year, to be able to go and indulge in this sickness for 1 week. And that was the basis of his whole life.
Isn't it crazy how he confided in you so fast too? Do you like give your credit to like your like UC skills? Do you think he was just some creeper looking for companionship, or like why open up that door so quickly with you in those private chats?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It wasn't that quick. I mean, it was weeks of talking to him before it turned
Okay.
into what he was really about. It wasn't like day one he opened up with, "I like children."
Yeah.
It's hard for me because I've been doing this so long, and unfortunately, I do have a lot of skill, talent in terms of being able to talk to these guys. My testimony. I mean, I spent years, 10 plus years, laundering money for drug cartels, So, my background is street. I understand how the street is. And back in the day, I used to indulge in the red light zone in Tijuana and in other places. So, I come at it from a different perspective. Jesus came in my life in September 16th, 2005, and everything changed for me. But before that, I was never was involved with children, but I was a sex tourist while I was on business. And so I think I have a unique or a somewhat unique advantage in how I approach these guys. I've had, the US government, a couple of the agents said, "Hey man, we've never seen an undercover agent and anyone do undercover work like you do. Like you're the best operator we've ever seen." I don't think that's true, but I am able, like, I don't think I've ever landed in any country, in any city, and not had a live op, an actionable op in more than 48 hours. So I don't know if I'm really proud of that, but I am able to jump into these places and get in the middle of these type of people and manage to call them out really quick.
Well, it's awesome, man. Well, I know I'm super grateful for what you do because obviously it allowed me to serve this survivor. It's an esthetician that was victimized by someone like Dennis. I think it's safe to say they're all bad, bro. But it's probably safe to say you save the worst for last. Am I right?
Yeah,
Yeah. All right, man.
absolutely.
Floor is yours, man.
All right. Honestly, it's exhausting. It's like reliving each of these cases, and I'm seeing these guys and I'm seeing their victims.
Yeah.
So this is just exhausting, and we kept the worst for last. Like I said earlier, I think I've done. I stopped counting a long time ago, but I'm well over or close to 200 operations. So a lot of times they all mix together, trying to remember which victim came from which case, and all these things. It gets kind of complicated. But the case that we're about to discuss is the one case that is easy to separate because it's the worst case I've ever been involved with. The sickest man that I've ever had to spend time with, and I think probably the greatest achievement in my life as an operator was putting this guy David Joshua Brown away. The Peruvian government and media put the tag name on him as the Beast, and I don't even think that's bad enough to describe what this guy was about. So here's what happened. We did an operation in Colombia and another successful operation there. And at the time in Peru, HSI didn't have anybody working human trafficking or sexual exploitation. They hadn't opened up that position yet. So at that time, Colombia, the Bogota HSI office oversaw Peru as well as Colombia. So I got back from the Colombian operation, successful operation, and I got a call from the HSI agent in Bogota, and he said, "Listen, we've been contacted by Peru, and Peru would like to do an operation similar to what we've done in Colombia. Will you do it?" And unfortunately, I always say yes. I don't think I've ever said no to any of these operations. So they said, we're gonna bring you in, start doing your work. Well, I had already been to Peru. I was sent there by another organization, probably a year beforehand. So I already had a pretty good intelligence network set up, and I had multiple targets. One of those targets, the way that I found him, I was on one of the sex tourism websites, and I noticed this guy that was extremely popular. He was probably the most popular, definitely most popular guy in the Peru group. And basically, he people were talking, and he was talking about how he could connect you with anything you wanted. There was no kink that he couldn't provide with the girls that he had. Never specifically mentioned children. But he did, one guy posted pictures and did a write up on these two. It was actually a mother and daughter that David Joshua Brown had connected him with. And he had sex with the mother and daughter. And I'm like, okay, this guy is sick and he needs to go down. So I flew in. I had been in contact with David the last trip and I told him, hey, I'm here. I'm interested. What do you got? And because at that time, Peru and the U.S. government was not prepared. We basically had to call the op off, and I left and never followed through with him. So when I arrived back in town, I sent another message and said, "Hey man, I'm sorry about last trip. I'm back in town. I'm ready to go." And the way it works when we jump into these foreign countries, people think we just go in and we're running renegade uh, operations, and that's not how it works. When we go into foreign countries, either the U.S. government brings us in, or we go in and connect directly with the local government's attorney general. So in this case, the agent, sorry, the agent out of Colombia flew in and met me the day I arrived. We went to the attorney general's office, and I signed the paperwork, which basically makes me or any of the operators an undercover agent of the government. So at that point that I signed that document, I was an undercover agent for the government of Peru under the Attorney General of Peru. So I had legal authority. U.S. guy takes off, basically leaves me there. He did introduce me to the human trafficking agents that I'd be working with, but really no direction. So I was like, all right, I'm just gonna have to do this. So in reaching out to David, I agreed with him that I was interested, and what could he get me? So immediately he sets me up. He says, "Yeah, I'm going to send you this girl. You're going to love her." He did not say she was a child. He didn't really say anything about her. He just said she's new and you'll like her. So the girl shows up at the door of the Airbnb that I was in, knocks on the door. I bring her in, and I put a bunch of cocaine on the table, and that was going to be my out. I was going to tell her that because of the coke, I couldn't perform, and that was going to be my out. So when she came in, I said, "Listen, I'll give you the $100 and you can just go, but I appreciate it if you wouldn't tell David that I was unable to perform. I just been using a lot of cocaine." And she said, "No." She was actually she was nice. And she sat down. She said, "No, I'll hang out a bit." So I said, "Listen, I'll give you $200 if you will tell David that I did have sex with you, and if we can have a chat." So I started talking to her, and I'm like, by the way, you look really young. How old are you? And she's like, "I'm 17." So right there, to start the op, like this is day one that I was in country. David has already provided me with a minor, which is all we needed from a U.S. legal standpoint. And the op was over. So I started talking to her, and she's telling me, "Do you know him very well?" And I'm like, "No." She's like, "Man, this guy's a sick man." And I'm like, "Why? What's he doing?" And she's like, "Well, I don't want to talk about it, but he's into a lot of weird stuff." And gave her the money. She left. She told David that everything went well, which that helped me from a case standpoint. And we started moving on. Well, my cover on that operation was that I was a businessman and that I was in town to open up a chain of restaurants. So I called David and I said, "Listen, beyond the girl stuff, which by the way, your girl was awesome. I'm here for business. Maybe you can help me out because the guy owned a sex toy distributorship. He'd been in Peru for 30 years at that time, and he sold condoms, dildos, all the stuff you see in sex stores." And so he agreed. So we started meeting every day at this Chinese restaurant out by where he lived. And the first couple of meetings were mellow. Yeah, I'm looking for space to rent. I'm running around in taxis. I had an undercover agent with who I said was my driver, and everything was pretty mellow. Well, I think it was the third day, the third lunch that we had, and he told me that he wasn't going to eat because he was, his stomach was upset. I'm like, "Oh man, what happened?" And I don't know. I probably shouldn't say this on your podcast, but this is what he said. He said, "Oh, last night I ate shit." And I said, what do you mean? Like, you had oral sex with a woman's anus or something? And he's like, no, I literally ate shit. And he went on to describe that what his thing was, he would pay these girls, he would take them to McDonald's, have them load up on Big Macs or Whoppers or whatever, like overeat, like stuff themselves. He'd get them back to his house and he would give them laxatives, and literally he would have them poop on his face and in his mouth.
Listen,
And at that point, I was like, yeah, I can't do this case. This is just too, like, just the thought of that. Every time I saw him after that, all I could picture was that image. Well, the next couple of days, we kept meeting, and he started to open up a little bit more. And he said, I have an attraction to children, and I'm like, wow, that's cool. I like them, like, adolescent age stuff. He's like, no, I like children. And at that point, he pulls out his phone and he starts showing me these pictures of where he is sodomizing boys and girls. But most of these kids were 5 to 8 years old. Showed me pictures from lots of them from Peru. He showed me a video of him raping a 3 or 4 year old boy in, I think it was Cambodia. Um, And he's like, "Isn't this cool?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, yeah, that's really cool." And you have to hold cover in something like that, and those images never go away. Like, once you've seen that stuff, you I don't know, I don't think you'll ever be able to get rid of it. Well, as the days and weeks, they literally left me there undercover on the first trip with him. I was there 4 weeks and had to meet with this guy every day, and every day it got sicker and sicker, and he'd share more and more stories. And then it turned out, he told me, he said, what I like to do is I like to find them, 3 to 5 years old, and I like to see them once a year. And later on in the case, we verified that that was actually true. He would rape the same child once a year, every year from the time they were when he got them, which most of them were starting at five ish, all the way till they were 16, and he would make a video catalog of every year of the rape of that same child. So as things progressed, we started meeting with some contacts that he put me connected me with, including a couple of his recruiters. And the one girl, we had lunch with her, and I had two Peruvian Asians with me that trip, or on that lunch. I had my driver, and then I had a girl, a female agent that we said was my secretary. And we're having lunch with this girl, and she starts telling us, like, you need to be careful with David. He's a dangerous person. And she doesn't know that these two guys are cops, and they're both packing. And she starts to tell us, like, she was involved with, he had gotten someone had delivered him two sisters, and he raped them, and the one girl escaped, and he called this girl, and she went and found her, got her, picked her up, and brought her back to the beast. And then he took them to a motel and raped them there with her in the room. And then he took them out to the country, killed them, and buried them. And I'm sitting here listening to her tell me this, and she's telling me how sick David is. And I'm thinking, you are as sick as David is, right? And the case just kept going and going and going. They finally let me go after 4 weeks. I was able to go home and try to regain my sanity. Um, and then everything. I mean, I was sending daily reports of everything, and he started sending me his child rape videos. So I had that evidence as well on my phone, and I would forward that to HSI, and they're like, okay, this is serious. They put together a team from Washington, set up to bring in forensic teams from DC. They're top guys in the FBI. And so they called me and they're like, okay, we're ready to go. You need to go back in. And I'm thinking, oh God, I don't want to go be with this guy. Can't you just arrest him? We've got enough. And they're like, no, you need to go. So I fly back in and spent again another 2 weeks of daily meetings with this sick pup. And from there, I kept telling him, well, we got these my friends are coming in. There's gonna be a big party. We probably need more girls than you have. Some of these guys like fresh, like you like fresh. And he said, well, I can probably get 10 or 15. And he said, but I can connect you with people who can get more. So he connected me with a couple of his recruiters, a couple of his suppliers. And the one woman, she had a four, I think it was 3 and 5 or 4 and 6 year old daughters. It was her daughters. And she came to the Airbnb and I met with her and she's like, yeah, I can offer your friends my daughters. They'll do anything except for penetration. And I'm sitting there thinking, these are your daughters. And she's showing me pictures of her daughters. And I'm thinking, what type of person does it take to be willing to offer their children? When she's like, yeah, don't worry, they're experienced. Like they each have their own dildos. My boyfriends regularly, like, we do sexual things with them. Both of them love to masturbate. I'm thinking, you're talking about babies, and at that time I had a fairly newborn baby. I think Mingo was 2 at the time, and I'm thinking, my God, like to imagine that was beyond me. Well, turned out he connected me. I think we had 3 or 4 of his recruiters beyond him, and day of op, we had set up I think 5 locations, 5 or 6 locations. I don't remember the details of that, but we had multiple locations set up, and TAC teams were on each of them. I was set up with the biggest group. I was set up with I think I had 18 minors. So my driver picks me up. We've got like 18 of these kids in the car, and I'm getting calls. And I'm the only one in the car. The guy's armed. I'm not armed. David, over the last 24 or 48 hours before the op, somehow decided that I was a cop, and he started calling all these girls saying, "Don't go. He's a cop. He's a cop." And none of the girls, they're like, "No, he's not a cop. We've met with him. We're doing this." So the ride to the safe house without having a weapon on me and I didn't have any backup. I couldn't. There was no way to get an undercover Peruvian in the car. So we get to the op house, and I get the call, that we're green, and sure enough, through the door comes the TAC team. I think it was 9 or 10. They pulled all my people out. They hit all the other houses simultaneously, including David's house. When they went into David's house, um, which was also his business, they did a search of the house, and they found, I think it was 5,000 homemade child porn videos. Um, and included in that were hundreds of victims, where he had cataloged the yearly rape. So he had them, from 5 to 16, and not just 1 or 2 victims. We're talking hundreds of victims. The case ended there. I think we got, I don't know, 20 or 30 minor victims that were all victims of David as well, rescued. And then, I thought, okay, well, we got this monster off the street. Praise God for that. And the mother of those 2 little kids was arrested as well. Um, we have good news on her. She actually found Christ in jail, came to repentance, and I talked to the prosecutors probably every 6 months these days. But she's actually doing well. Like, this happening turned her life around. So we praise God for that. David was sentenced to 30 years in prison, which I don't know if he lived through COVID. But I stay in communication with the undercover cops, and the last they told me was within 3 days of being in jail, David liked boys and girls, men and women. So within 3 days, he had found himself the biggest black guy in the jail, and that was he became that guy's girlfriend. So I don't know if he died during COVID or what, but he was sentenced to 30 years.
Yeah,
Um,
if you Google the case, that's what I've been doing as you've been talking. It's a case you talk about it being such a professional and personal accomplishment because you got this real son of a bitch off the street, and he's like it's featured in CNN, it's featured in KSL News, it's featured on Fox News, it's featured on El Espectador from Colombia. It's all over, and he got the largest maximum sentence that a person can get improved for committing human trafficking.
yeah. I mean, again, that was in my of all my cases, probably that was definitely probably my marquee case. Um, but Tyler, I paid a price for that case. It took me years to recover from that operation. I still probably there's parts of me that um, are never going to be fully well just from what I had to deal with on that. And with that case specifically, that was a little bit different than most cases. Usually, I always had people with me, whether it was or at least the U.S. government was there. On that case, they pretty much just said go in, and everybody just said good luck. Um, so it was weeks of really really difficult challenges. At one point, we were at a lunch, and I had brought my secretary, my undercover secretary, to that lunch as well with David, and he was talking about how he had raped a 3-year-old the night before, and I guess my face turned, I looked like a tomato, according to the female cop, and she under the table tapped my leg, and next thing I know, her gun is sitting on my leg, and I grabbed it, and I think one of my greatest regrets in life is that I didn't take him out right then.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that because I'm not somebody I've never, I don't even hurt bugs. But I've never in my life wanted and felt so justified in taking someone's life. I didn't do it. But it was close, brother. It was close.
So I first off, like, I mean, thanks for what you did on that case. Like just looking at the news, and it's all over. I imagine it made a lot of people's careers, like this case, because it's all over CNN, Fox News, ICE's website, HSI's website, and so just and you were the one we have to having to interact with this guy. Like, there's an old saying of like when you look into the abyss, the abyss looks back, and it has an effect on your soul. And so I guess, like, to close up the podcast, man, I want to give you the space to share, like, what do you do to cleanse your palate, or what do you do to what brings you joy? And like, I know, like, I've known you for going on almost a decade now, and one thing, the first word that I think of when I think of my friend Batman is faith. I know that faith plays such such an important role in your life. And like, when I was staying with you, you're waking up at freaking 3:30 in the morning to do worship and to read the Bible and all these different things. And so I want to give you the space as we close, just to if you're down, if you feel comfortable to talk about what you do to take care of yourself, and how much faith plays into it. If you want to share your story, you can. If you want to share your testimony, you can. But faith, I know, plays such an important role in what you do and who you are, that I wouldn't feel right if I had done this podcast talking about all these bad guys and not giving you a chance to talk about how much your faith means to you.
Sure. Yeah, we'll save the testimony for another day because that'll take hours. Um, for me, brother, as you know, I mean, my life is Jesus. Everything, my family, my ministry, my everything I do, it's all Jesus. I give him all the glory. There's not one op that I've ever done, including the four that we just talked about, which are four of many, where I can look at it and say that it was done in my power. Every good work that I've ever done or been involved with has come directly from Jesus, and I can get into those details. But there's a lot of times, especially before I go into a country and when I land, where it's just pray, and that God will expose and let me see what He wants me to see, needs me to see, and that I'll walk in Him through it. So for me, there's no life, no, there's nothing outside of Christ. I was blessed, as you know. I actually was able to rescue my wife before I married her. She was raped by her father from 11 to 16, and then sold into a trafficking ring out of Puebla in Mexico. And it took 3 years, but I was able to rescue her with the help of Campus Crusade. And then she was the first adult. I had a house full of kids. They were 5 to 15. She was the only 18 plus in there. And she went through a new healing program that we had that was basically the Holy Spirit. And she got healed. And I don't know what God was doing, but I never wanted to get married. But He connected us. And it's been, I think we've been married 11 years now. And so we were able to fight this war together. She does all the restoration work, or leads the restoration work, while I do rescue. And sometimes in the princesses, I teach the Bible as well. So yeah, um, I don't know, man. Without faith, I would have nothing. Especially in this world, sometimes I think with everything we have going on outside of trafficking, with the craziness that's happening in our world, in our country, and sometimes I think, like, how do people that don't have Jesus survive this? Like how do you maintain? Like, even with Jesus, I'm finding myself more and more like in this battle, to stay stable through the waves. Like the waves are crashing. But yeah, for me, it's Jesus. And if I can, Tyler, I just want to close out with my thought with you. Is that okay?
Sure, bro.
So I just want to share with whoever, I don't know who's going to hear this, but I just want to share that I've known Tyler for, like he said, almost a decade. We've served together all over Latin America, and my family, my wife, my kids, my dogs. Tyler, and he travels a lot with Jessica as well. But the two of our favorite people in the world. When I looked at this new organization, or this organization that you've put together, Libertinas,
Libertas.
um, Libertas.
Yes, sir.
I was so excited because as I looked through it, I'm like, man, this is perfect. Like all the contacts that God has put you in contact with over the years to now all come together in a compilation, to serve such a great need, which is helping these survivors. And there's no one in this world that I think is better equipped, certainly in Latin America, than you, Tyler, to be leading that effort. So I just want to encourage the people that are listening to this. I just made a donation in between our break to your organization. I would highly encourage others to do it. I can vouch 100% for Tyler, for his character, for his heart. I'm not going to find a guy that loves people more than Tyler. And I consider it a blessing and an honor to be able to have spent this time with you, Tyler. And I can't wait to see you again. We just hooked up. We were in California together like a month ago. It was freaking awesome. So I know our next trip, or we'll see you soon. But thanks for having me on, and God bless you.